pals, I'm here today to do a sort of check-in video. I do these every 2 months, I've done one so far this year. In this check-in video I talk about the books that I bought, the books that I DNF'd, the books that I unhauled, and then I sort of have a look at my TBR and how I'm doing. And then I think I'll just have a sort of think about how my reading's been going and if there's anything I'd like to change or aim for and all that stuff. So I do have a little notebook where I keep track of all this stuff. And what I thought I'd start tracking is I do a DNF video over on my Patreon, which is always linked down below if you're interested, but I thought at least in these videos I start mentioning how many pages I've read each month that I ended up DNFing, because actually it can take up quite a lot of my reading and I don't really capture it if not. So yeah, I thought I would chat about that here. So in March I DNF'd 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books, and they actually totalled 700 pages, which was a lot. And that's because quite a few of these books I read quite big chunks out of. And all bar one of these books were library books. The one that wasn't a library book was a book I was sent from the publishers that I just thought, oh, that sounds interesting, I'll keep that. And that was Good Intentions by Kasim. And I read 130 pages of that before I DNF'd it. And so that is one book I unhauled in the month of March. Like I said, if you want to hear about the other books I DNF'd that month, you can go check out my Patreon. And then I'm going to talk about the books I purchased in March, and I have mentioned these in a recent sort of TBR video I think, so I'm not going to talk about them in any detail, but I will just mention them so you know what I have. So I bought 5 books in March, they are all cluttered around me. I bought 3 non-fiction books, one being An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. I've heard about this a couple of years ago, really wanted it since then and finally caved and bought it. One is White Magic, which is an essay collection by Elissa Washuta and is a lot chunkier than I was expecting. And a much smaller one is We Do This Till We Free Us, Abolitionist Organising and Transforming Justice by Mariame, and these are sort of essays and interviews written down. So those are the 3 non-fiction I bought, and I bought all of those from Blackwell's online. And then I bought 2 books in Waterstones in person, fiction, and that is Sundial by Catriona and Violets by Hyde. These are both releases that came out in March, and I picked them up within a sort of week of them coming out. And I have actually read both of these. I read both of these in April, and I haven't read any of the 3 non-fiction that I picked up in March yet, which isn't very good. So in total, on those 5 books, I spent £63, which I feel like is a decent amount, especially as a couple of those were new releases and none of these were on any sort of like deals or anything. So yeah, I'm happy with £63. I'm also happy that I'm sticking to the not using Amazon and, you know, trying to get some books online and some books in bookshops. And all 3 of these I wouldn't have been able to get in my local bookshops because I have one independent and a Waterstones, and neither of those shops stock US editions, and all 3 of these books are not published in the UK. So I'm happy with the way that went. And then in April I also DNF'd 6 books, and again 5 of them were from the library and 1 of them was from my shelf. So I only DNF'd 219 pages in April, so I did much better, which I'm glad, because yeah, 700 pages of DNFs was just annoying. So in April, the one book I DNF'd off my own shelves was a book that I bought in February and thought I was going to love, and that is Tastes Like War, a memoir by Grace M. Cho. So that was a sort of sad DNF. And then, yeah, the other books I DNF'd were all library books, like I said. And then I only bought 3 books in April, so I did quite well, and all 3 of those were fantasy, because I am trying to read Michael Fantasy this year, and all 3 of these were off a TBR video I made at the start of the year, which I'll link up above. One of them I bought new, and that is the Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. I really like this cover, and I picked this one up from Blackwell's, so that was really easy to get hold of. And then these 2 are sort of early 2000s fantasy, and both of these were recommended by Chris over at Chris's Bookish Cauldron, and so I had to get these secondhand because they're no longer available to buy sort of brand new from bookshops. So I got these both from secondhand sellers online. The first one is one I've read and gave 5 stars, and that is Rules of Ascension by David B. Coe. This is book 1 in the Winds of the Foreland series, which is a 5-book series. They all have these sort of awful covers, although I really do like reading books of this size because I find them really comfortable to hold, so I'm willing to forgive the awful cover. So that was a really fun one. And then the next one is The One Kingdom, which is by Sean Russell, and is the first book in the Swan's War, I think, trilogy. And so I think I will manage to read both of these in May, so really pleased about that. And I only spent £18.68 on those 3 books in the month of April. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to like where these books came from in terms of my TBR and things like that. So in March I read 9 books, and only 2 of them were actually from my TBR. They were both from my pre-2022 TBR, so you know, I read books I'd had for a while, but it's not that great because 5 of them were from the library, so I'm still like reaching for the books that I've got more recently. Now that's probably because a lot of them had other people in the queue, so I had to read them quickly, but I'm just going to try and reduce the amount of books I borrow from the library. And then 2 of them in March were on audio. So yeah, like 7 of those 9 books were like not helping me reduce the amount of books I own in any way. So not great. And then in April, like I said, I only read 7 books. 3 of them were off my new TBR, so they were books I purchased in 2022 that I then read in 2022, so that was good. 2 of them were from the library, and then 2 of them were ebooks. So once I read the one Vira McFarlane book in April, I then purchased another one on my Kindle, and then I purchased the Bethany Rutter book on my Kindle, just because I felt like reading books like that, and they're not books that I sort of really mind not having physical copies of on my shelf, so I'm fine with having Kindle versions. So yeah, really haven't made much headway on my actual own books that I am really excited about. So I now only have 4 books on my library hold list that I'm waiting for, and I'm not letting myself reserve any more. So I'm going to work through the books I've got, which I think is 15. I'll gradually work through them, and then these other 4 will come in as and when. And then other than that, I'm going to try and just like barely use my library for the rest of the year, which sounds cruel because I love my library. But once I've got my TBR down, I can then next year like love the library again. But at least for the next few months, I just need to focus on the books I currently have. And then I have a sort of TBR tracker, and I hope this all makes sense. I started the year with 67 unread books. By the end of February, which was the last time I checked in, I had 65 unread books. Then in February, I read 2 books from my TBR, so it went down to 63. I unhauled one because I tried it and didn't like it, so it went down to 62. But then I bought 5 books which I like didn't read, so it went back up to 67. So by the end of March I was like in exactly the same place as I've been at the start of the year. Then in April I read 3 of the new books, and I bought 3 more new books. But then I did unhaul 1 book because I DNF'd it. So I ended the month with 66 books. So I'm now at 66. So I have 1 less book than I started the year with, which if I carry on in this fashion, I'll end up with 3 less books than I started the year with at the end of the year, which I'm not happy with. It's not good enough. So yeah, like I said, in large part this is just because I am focusing way too much on the library. Yeah, so much of my reading has been from the library so far this year, and I just need to stop requesting, which I have done. It's just that I had so many books on hold that that's still, you know, gradually filtering in. But I'm hoping that, say, by the end of June, I will have made headway with the ones I've got and the ones that are coming in, and then for the second half of the year, I'll barely have any library books to contend with, and I can focus much more on these shelves. I have one more thing that I have started to track, which I didn't mention in the first couple of months of the year, and that is how many pages I'm reading. And the reason I've started doing that is because I'm now focusing on reading some fantasy. Fantasy do tend to be chunkier books, and sometimes I'll feel like I don't want to reach for one because, oh well, I could read 2 or 3 literary fiction books in that time, or in that page count at least. And actually, that's not really true because I read fantasy much quicker. So like I'd probably read a 600-page fantasy book in the same amount of time it would take me to read a 400-page literary fiction. So yeah, I don't read at the same speed for every type of book, but I have decided to track based on sort of 3 categories. One being how many pages I read physically, one being how many pages I listened to on audio, and then another being how many pages of books I read that I then DNF'd, because if not, I'm just missing out on what could be quite a large chunk. So in March, in total, I read 3,447 pages, which I'm happy with. My usual like happy average would be, you know, around 100 pages a day, which that was. And so 2,291 pages of that were physical books that I read from start to finish. 528 pages were books I listened to on audio, and then like I said in March I read 700 pages of books that I didn't actually finish. Then that number reduced in April because I just didn't read anywhere near as much, but I was expecting it to really reduce down because I just felt like I didn't read much in April at all, but actually because a couple of those books were fantasy books, I still read a decent page amount, and that was 3,235 pages, of which 3,016 pages were made up of books I read physically from start to finish. I didn't finish an audiobook in April, so there's no pages for audio, and then I read 219 pages of books that I DNF'd in April, like I mentioned. So yeah, I feel like I can sort of easily read around 100 pages a day, but I would like to, ideally, to get through as many books as I would like to get to, I think I need to be sitting closer to like 5,000 pages a month, and I think I can get to that if I try and even up the type of books I read more. So pair the literary fiction or the non-fiction that I'm slower to read with the more pacey fantasy or like YA or sort of romance books that I read much quicker. And I actually think that balance keeps me reading more, because moving between books like that means that I don't get sort of stuck at one pace, because I just bounce around and there's much more variety. So yeah, sort of one thing I'm thinking of, like I've mentioned already, the biggest thing for the rest of the year is the library. I'm just going to stop requesting library books, or I'm only going to let myself request books that were on my pre-order list that I'm not 100% sure of. So like I'm going to see if the library has them, but that won't amount to like a ton of books, because a lot of the books I'm interested in aren't published in the UK and my library won't buy them, so that's fine. So I'm going to really reduce that. And then, so that's one big thing that should make a difference. The other thing is, like I said, variety. I want to try and move between genres a lot and aim to read closer to 5,000 pages a month, because I think that'll make a massive difference. And then the third and final thing, which is perhaps the most structured, is that I've started to think that in order to stop myself just reading predominantly from one place, I'm going to make myself read from like, so I've done a bookshelf tour recently, which I'll link up above, and I have 3 shelves. One is my newest books I've bought this year. This shelf here is my books I bought and haven't read yet from last year, and the bottom shelf is books I've owned longer than that. But up above all of those I have all the books that I have up from the library at the moment. So there's sort of like 4 shelves to pick from, and what's really been happening so far this year is I've predominantly picked from the top 2 because they're the newest books. But what I was thinking might work is, and audio doesn't really fit in on this, so that's like a separate thing, is that I should make myself just go 1, 2, 3, 4 every time I select a book. So I never, at the end of the month, if I read an even number of books that's like a multiplier of 4, then I should have read evenly from each of the shelves. So like I'd be super happy if I managed to read like say 16 books and that was 4 books off each of these shelves. That would just feel like I'm making real headway with all of them. And yeah, I'd be really happy with that. So that's what I'm going to try and do, force myself to, you know, just read through the shelves, and we shall see how that goes. So let me know if you think that makes sense. Obviously, if I still buy loads of books, this shelf will fill up a lot, but I think I've been quite good in the last couple of months. As you can see, I only bought 3 books in April, and I'm like super happy with that. I didn't feel the need to buy any more books, although my birthday is in a week or so. and I have asked for a few books, but that's always going to be a point in the year when I know my TBR will just lift a bit, so it's just one of those things I'll have to account for. But yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts. I enjoy doing these videos, but I'm way too lazy to make like charts and stuff and graphs, so I'm really sorry if it's like hard to follow everything I'm saying without imagery, but I'm just not that. I spend too much time at work on spreadsheets and on a computer to want to do it any more than I have to for like a hobby, so I hope that's okay. So yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts based on anything I've said, any advice. I would love advice on any of the things I've mentioned, recommendations, all those things. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye.